Hey everybody, it is Monday, July 17th. You're listening to the Mo News podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, it is so good seeing you just a couple hours after I saw you already this weekend.
Yes, we had your wife Alex's baby shower on Sunday, and it was so nice. She and her family put together such a great event, as I knew that they would.
Yes, you literally got to see what I ate this weekend, which was a lot. It's good
Me
potpourri.
too, by the way.
Yes, we both enjoyed many great appetizers, entrees, desserts, etc. And we got a lot of nice gifts, including Jill, a bunch of baby books, including several baby books related to the news and famous female journalists. So I'm very excited to be able to read those to who we're calling Baby O these days when she arrives.
Well, we will look forward to a name. And as I said on Friday, I'll meet you at the dessert table. And I did. All right, let's get to some news here. After more than a decade, a suspect has been charged in the murders of at least 3 women on Long Island in a cold case that had captured the national spotlight. Some good news in Alabama. A woman who was missing has returned home. On to politics. Some trouble for the 2-month-old Ron DeSantis campaign. What is going on there? Plus, overseas, record heat hits Europe. We're talking almost 120 degrees in Italy as the southern U.S. also faces a new heat wave. History made at Wimbledon. On the men's side, a 20-year-old beat the 23-time Grand Slam champ Novak Djokovic in a 5-set match.
And some history made on the women's side as well that we'll tell you about.
All right, feeling lucky? The Powerball has jumped to nearly $1 billion after no jackpot winners this weekend. And it appears Americans are falling out of love with ice cream, which means that clearly no one has consulted with Moshe on this story.
Jill, more for me. Though I will say that I'm going to have some trouble trying to remain nonpartisan and unbiased when we report out this story later in the podcast.
And Moshe is on the same history.
Mom, the meatloaf. The meatloaf. You know my clue?
Wedding Crashers?
You may be right, Jill. You may be right. On the same history, we'll have more on that film and some other history later at the end of the pod.
All right, let's get started. A Long Island architect was charged Friday with murder in the deaths of 3 of the 11 victims in a long, unsolved string of killings known as the Gilgo Beach murders on Long Island, New York. It came after detectives pursued a new lead after more than a decade, saying that they matched DNA from a pizza the alleged killer ate to genetic material that was found on the women's remains. Rex Heuermann, who has lived for decades across a bay from where the remains were found, has been charged with killing 3 women. He is also considered the prime suspect in the death of a 4th woman whose body was bound and hidden in thick underbrush along a remote beach highway. This caps off an investigation that started in 2010. That's when the disappearance of a 23-year-old Shannon Gilbert exposed a larger mystery when investigators found the remains of 10 more bodies, all within walking distance of each other. Later in 2010, police also discovered the remains of 24-year-old Melissa Bartholomew while searching for Gilbert. Days later, investigators discovered the remains of 3 additional victims, Maureen Barnes, Amber Costello, and Megan Waterman. The women were all wrapped in camouflaged burlap and buried within a quarter mile of each other. They became known as the Gilgo Four. Each of these women worked as escorts who advertised their services on Craigslist. Later, police discovered the remains of 6 additional people, including an Asian male and a female toddler. At this point, police not connecting those other victims with the Gilgo Four. As for the suspect, the 59-year-old Rex Heuermann is married. He's a father of 2. He runs a respected Fifth Avenue architect firm in Manhattan and lives just 15 miles from Gilgo Beach. He was taken into custody without bail on Friday. He told his attorney he is not the killer. He entered a not guilty plea. His next court date is scheduled for August 1st. Moshe, back in 2011, authorities had put together a profile of the type of person that they thought could be the killer. And it's eerily on point. At the time, they said the killer was probably a white man in his mid-20s to mid-40s, married or had a girlfriend, well educated, well spoken, financially secure, owning an expensive car or truck, and living near where the bodies were found.
Yeah, Jill, I know that you were reporting out on Long Island during that time and covered this case very closely. And so the question for many people in the past few days was, how did they find him after all this time? Because it felt like the trail went dark. So these murders happened in 2010, 2011. Fast forward to January 2022. That's when Suffolk County prosecutors in New York assembled a team of investigators, analysts, local police, and FBI to resurrect the case. And that's when authorities identified Huerman as a suspect and for the next year and a half began watching and surveilling him as they built a trail of evidence. So they put together that group after the case had gone cold after many, many years. Just 2 months into those meetings, in March of 2022, just March of last year, detectives linked Huerman to a Chevy Avalanche pickup truck registered to him at the time of the murders that was similar to one reportedly seen by a witness when one of the victims, Amber Costello, disappeared back in 2010. So they had the car. And by the way, goes to the profile, right? Owned a luxury car. So they start to follow him. And they start to develop more circumstantial evidence over time. Huerman apparently used burner phones to contact 3 women he suspected of killing during the time that they were reported missing. Investigators say that he used one of the victims' phones to make taunting phone calls to family members, allegedly using another cell phone to check her voicemails. Well, they started to triangulate data and found that his personal cell phone was pinging to the same towers as the burner cell phones. So the evidence starts to build here. He apparently also maintained several email accounts, which he created under pseudonyms to search for sex workers. He apparently, Jill, and we see this a lot with these criminals, made 200 Google searches about the Gilgo Beach murders. So they start to see all the Google interest, all the Google searches he has about this investigation, about the disappearance of the women, and that he apparently continued to compulsively keep track of the victims' families online via Google searches that they found. Separate from that, he made thousands of explicit Google searches, including child pornography. So they start to build this over 2022 into early 2023. In early 2023, pizza crust effectively cracks the puzzle, as you mentioned. On January 26th of this year, they saw him throw away a pizza box into a trash can in Midtown Manhattan. They then picked that up, and a DNA swab from the leftover crust found Huerman's DNA was a match to the male hair found on one of the victims' bodies. They then continue to track him, but then they find that he was recently, Jill, buying new burner phones. He was a registered gun owner. They were watching his Google searches, and they were very concerned that he might hurt someone again. And so then they went in for the arrest last week. Jill, we were corresponding about this on Friday when the developments unfolded, and you were talking in depth about all the things you discovered while you were reporting on this back on Long Island in 2010, 2011.
Yeah, I was a nightside reporter in 2010 and 2011 when police first discovered those bodies. And it was almost unreal. It felt like every other night, police had found more remains belonging to different people. And at the time, I had interviewed the family of many of these victims. So for their sake, I'm really happy that a suspect has been named. Perhaps they could finally get some type of closure here. And, kudos to just good old fashioned police work. They had this new task force that you described in Suffolk County. They put together this new task force to take a new look at the case with fresh eyes. And it was using technology that wasn't available a decade ago, from the DNA testing, also to some of that cell phone technology, that they were really able to hone in on the suspect here.
Jill, and it's only the latest in one of these crime stories that got revived interest. There was a film put together that aired on Netflix that revealed how the top cop at the time was bungling the investigation. So this is a documentary, again, called Lost Girls into the Gilgo Beach murders, and that revived a lot of interest here. So for many people writing into Mo News over the weekend saying, oh my God, I just watched that on Netflix. I can't believe that they finally were able to solve this.
Yeah, and in the absence of an actual suspect, a lot of people were thinking, is the Suffolk police involved? Is somebody, all sorts of conspiracy theories started to float around. So it is good, again, that there is a suspect, at least at least related to the Gilgo 4. There are still the bodies of 6 other victims, where at this point there is not a suspect that has been named.
It does go to show you, though, that if they invest in good police work, they put together this whole team of detectives, FBI, etc. You can solve these. Unfortunately, there's just so many crimes out there that just for lack of resources, law enforcement effectively isn't able to solve because they just don't have enough people, time, and money to be able to solve these crimes.
And now to some good news from Alabama. The woman who went missing late Thursday night off of an interstate and sparked a lot of interest on social media was found late Saturday. Carly Russell is a 25-year-old nursing student. She returned alone to the home where she lives with her parents just before 11 p.m. on Saturday. She was having trouble breathing and was taken to a hospital shortly after. She was released Sunday morning. Police say they will try to piece together what happened in the 2 days that she was missing. The ordeal started Thursday when family members said that Russell left a spa where she had worked part-time and then picked up food on the way home. She had called 911 at about 9:34 p.m. She said she saw a male toddler in a diaper walking alone on the side of I-459. After calling 911, Russell stopped to check on the child and called a family member. The family member then lost contact with her, but the line remained open and they just heard cars driving by. Officers later located Russell's car. It was still running, but it was empty. Some of her belongings were nearby. Police were unable to find her or a child in the area. Police in that area of Hoover had not received any other calls of someone missing a small child.
So then the search was on for 2 days. It got a lot of media attention, Jill. I know immediately early Friday morning, we were already getting messages from people saying, please make folks aware of this case. This woman who went to go look after a child is missing now. So there were a lot of posts about it over the weekend. And then suddenly, Saturday night, just before 11 p.m. local, she pops up at home. So what happened? We don't quite know yet. The police say it won't be a quick process. The important thing is that Russell is home and safe. Their goal right now is to find out what happened in those 48 or so hours when she disappeared about a mile from her house. The police chief there saying, we don't have to move quickly. Our priority was to get her home. So we'll investigate and do what we have to do. Jill, there's no word yet on the child itself, the whereabouts of the child. And the family put out a statement on Facebook, but didn't go into detail as to what happened over those 48 hours. All we know, again, is that she was dropped off or somehow made it to her parents' subdivision and then walked up to the house and knocked on her parents' door. 48 hours after she went missing. So we'll stay on top of this because it certainly is leading to a whole variety of theories out there, but it is nice to be able to report on one of these stories where the victim is home safe.
All right, time now for the speed read. Some 2024 politics via Politico. Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida has started to cut campaign staff just months into his presidential bid. It comes as he has struggled to gain traction in the Republican primary and lost ground in some public polls to former President Trump. It appears that he has let go about a dozen staffers as the campaign reorganizes. Sources involved with the DeSantis campaign say there is an internal assessment that it hired too many staffers too early. Despite having brought in $20 million in fundraising during its first 6 weeks, it was becoming clear that costs needed to be brought down. Some in DeSantis' circle lay the early blame at the feet of campaign manager Janera Peck, who also led DeSantis' 2022 midterm reelection bid and is in the hot seat right now.
So, Jill, this comes at a time when a number of major donors who had expressed interest in DeSantis have grown concerned about his performance, concerned he isn't gaining traction with voters now that he's finally out on the trail, that his likability numbers go down as Republicans in some of the early states get to know him. Now, it is, we should note, very early. And you'll often see these types of stories, and we'll bring them to you, but we'll bring them to you with context throughout the campaign cycle. There are a number of candidates over time who've had to reset their campaigns, especially if they feel like they're not able to gain traction with voters. So you see here a situation with DeSantis, who came in blazing, but the numbers haven't grown as quickly as some would like. And of course, he came in with a very large campaign staff, so it appears they're hitting reset on that as well. One notable poll, by the way, is that even in Florida, which reelected DeSantis by nearly 20% last fall, Trump now has a 20-point lead over him in the Republican primary, and Florida is going to be a key state that DeSantis will depend on. Now, one thing to keep in mind about DeSantis is that he's had different campaign teams for every single run he's made. For his 3 runs in Congress, for his run for governor in 2018, for his run for governor in 2022. So he's known to be churning through staff. Notably, there is still a lot of money behind him. The Never Back Down Super PAC, that's the independent super PAC that's supporting DeSantis, says it'll spend up to $200 million to boost his White House bid. And so there's still a lot of money behind him, a lot of big donors, a lot of traction. When you look at all the early state polls, he's effectively in second place behind Trump. But it appears there is a slight reset here happening within his campaign, Jill. And one thing that we should all be looking to next month, the first debates between the Republican candidates. Right now, it's still up in the air as to whether Trump will show up. But nevertheless, many voters will get their first big chance to see DeSantis in the format of a debate. And so that could be key as he is looking to build traction here. And what's notable about him, Jill, is that as you start to figure out how each of the GOP candidates are trying to carve out what's left of the GOP electorate once you put Trump aside, DeSantis has tried to move to Trump's right, which has been interesting to see whether there's space for him there. But some critics are saying, and this includes some people who donated to him, saying, how does he run in a general election against Biden if he's going to the right of Trump in a GOP primary? So those are among the many questions that don't have answers yet, as we're still about 6 months out from the first votes being cast in Iowa and New Hampshire.
From the Financial Times, a record heat wave in Europe will continue this week. Temperatures are expected to hit record highs in Italy, as much of southern Europe bakes in an intense heat wave that has driven authorities to mobilize medical facilities for the most vulnerable and warn people not to go outside. Thermometers are rising towards 105 degrees across much of Italy, Spain, parts of France, Greece, and the Balkans. Meteorologists predict that in Rome, temperatures on Tuesday could hit an all-time high for the city of 111 degrees. While on the island of Sardinia, the mercury projected to touch 118. The Italian weather forecasting agency said the heat wave had no precedent in terms of its intensity, duration, and spread.
Yeah, Jill, they actually had to shut down the Acropolis a couple times in the last week in Greece because it was so hot, and they were concerned about people walking about there, passing out water, making sure that there were no issues there. There were a couple heat-related deaths for people who have to work outside, including a construction worker in southern Europe, so that's a concern. But what we're seeing in Europe right now is a global trend, and that is concerns from meteorologists. The U.S., Europe, China, all seeing extreme heat. A recent estimate for last year's heat wave found that nearly 62,000 people across Europe died related to the heat, including 18,000 in Italy last year. As I mentioned, China also seeing extreme heat right now. The country broke a new record as one city hit 126 degrees last week. That beats an old record by 3 degrees, which is significant. Typically you see a record broken by just slightly 1 degree. The fact that a record is being broken by 3 degrees is concerning climate experts and meteorologists. The extreme heat is even taking effect down in Australia, where it's winter right now, and Sydney is seeing unseasonably warm weather. Right now, it's a combination. This is an El Nino year. We have a couple years of El Nino ahead, probably, and El Nino is one of those cycles that we see every so often that leads to more extreme heat. But that now combined with climate change is leading to these record-breaking numbers. Here in the U.S., as we've been reporting, tens of millions of Americans remain under heat-related weather alerts. Those of you in Texas, sorry, you'll continue baking this week, as well as those of you in the Southwest. Heat warnings were put in place for much of California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona. But even in the Northeast, Jill, it got pretty warm this weekend. Not as warm as the Southwest, but it did lead to country star Jason Aldean cutting short a concert because he wasn't doing well because of the heat. He said he was suffering from a combination of dehydration and heat exhaustion, which forced him to cut his show short in Connecticut this weekend, which is a reminder to us all, keep your fluids, limit your time outside if you can, but just, dehydration is a literal killer. So make sure you're drinking as much as you can and getting shade when possible.
All right, from CNN, we have our winners at Wimbledon. The world number 1, Carlos Alcaraz, beating the reigning champ Novak Djokovic in a thrilling 5-set men's final on Sunday. It is his first Wimbledon title. The Spaniard prevailed after nearly 5 hours on center court, eventually winning 1-6, 7-6, 6-1, 3-6, 6-4.
A lot of back and forth there. Yeah.
He fell onto the grass in celebration before volleying a tennis ball into the crowd. The 20-year-old becomes the third youngest Wimbledon champ and adds a second major title to his resume after winning the U.S. Open last year. 7-time Wimbledon champ Djokovic, who is now 36 years old, broke down in tears on the court afterwards as he addressed his children who watched the final from the players' box.
Jill, it was a star-studded Wimbledon. You had Brad Pitt there. You had Kate Middleton, Princess. You also had Ariana Grande in the crowd, Idris Elba. So a lot of high-profile people taking in the action. So that was the history made over on the men's side. Over on the women's side, some history made as well. Many of you may have never heard of the following name: Markéta Vondrousová of the Czech Republic. She's a 24-year-old tennis player who came in unseeded, and she's the first unseeded player to win Wimbledon. On Saturday, she beat Ons Jabeur, the heavy favorite from Tunisia, in straight sets. And based on her reaction, she stunned even herself, her family, her friends, the whole tennis world in the process. Jill, I mentioned she's from the Czech Republic, and despite the fact the country only has about 10 million people, it has become a women's tennis factory unlike anything else in the sport right now. Right now, there are 8 Czech women in the top 50. Most of them, like Vondrousová, are in their mid-20s and younger, really kind of continuing the tradition here of one famous Czech player who many of you may have heard of, Martina Navratilova. So look out for Vondrousová after that big win this weekend.
All right, from CNBC, another Powerball drawing ended with no winner Saturday night, sending the jackpot soaring to an estimated $900 million. Ticket buyers for tonight's drawing have a chance at either $900 million paid out in yearly increments or a lump sum of $465.1 million. That is before taxes. The top prize is the third biggest Powerball jackpot and the 7th largest in U.S. Lotto history.
Yeah, that $465.1 million, thank you for that. Still pretty good after taxes, Jill. I think the person will take home about $200+ million from that. So good luck to all of you who play tonight. While there was no jackpot winner over the weekend, Powerball did say that 3 tickets matched all 5 white balls, which means 3 winning tickets got to take home $1 million prizes over the weekend. Now, for those of you who play, you know that the jackpot will keep growing until someone wins. The odds, again, are 1 in 292.2 million. They're designed to build these big prizes. As this now builds towards $1 billion, keep in mind the largest Powerball jackpot in history was just over $2 billion last November.
CNN Business, America's age-old love affair with ice cream appears to be winding down. I almost can't say that.
Jill, this is like fake news. What are you bringing the fake news into the podcast for?
Moshe, you really are the biggest ice cream lover. Anyone who follows your Instagram, you and Alex would know.
I try my best to report things in a very straightforward, objective manner, Jill, but I'm going to have a lot of trouble in this story because I think the premise is flawed. For those of you who don't know, Jill and I will split the writing and the choosing of stories during the week. And on Sundays, I typically write it. And as I'm finishing, suddenly, I see appearing in our script this ice cream story. And I was like, what is this nonsense? But if this is what people are talking about, let's discuss it.
Well, you're an expert here, so that is why I decided that we had to include.
So, Jill, tell me more about this CNN story.
Okay, so apparently, consumption of regular dairy ice cream, which does not include frozen yogurt, sherbet, or non and low-fat ice creams, has been falling for years. Don't blame CNN. Don't blame me. Moshe, this is according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
What do they know?
In 1986, the average American ate 18 pounds of regular ice cream, according to the USDA.
Sounds about right.
But by 2021, the most recent year of data, that was down a third to just 12 pounds per person. Analysts suspect it is health that is the big reason for ice cream's decline. The trends now, though, are for smaller pints and more premium kind of gourmet flavors, which I feel like is sort of what you're all about.
Yeah, and I guess that part makes sense. I feel like growing up in the 80s and 90s, you'd go to the grocery store and buy those huge gallons of ice cream, right? Those huge, Breyers or whatever the brand was, and now you're buying those smaller pints. So I guess technically this makes sense, though. Again, I take issue with this entire thing. So Jill, as we do here, we looked into the history of ice cream as an American pastime of sorts. And it's very interesting to look into this. And frankly, I'd like to do a whole podcast about it. But you can go back to Prohibition. For the first time, ice cream really blew up as like a major thing. So Prohibition was that time period in the early 20th century when America banned booze. And so during that time, with alcohol banned, people turned to ice cream. Fun fact, Anheuser-Busch and Yuengling started making ice cream. The fat, the sugar, it apparently made a decent substitute for a while alcohol was illegal. Of course, they would make alcohol legal again, but people still liked ice cream. It continued to be the ultimate comfort food. It was meant to boost morale during World War II. And by the 1950s, with freezers becoming ubiquitous across the country, people got to take home ice cream with them. Jill, I could go on here. Have you heard the story about Baskin Robbins?
Which one?
So as a kid, actually, I used to live above a Baskin Robbins in Morton Grove, Illinois, but that's not the story here. The interesting story about Baskin Robbins related to all of this. So Baskin Robbins was founded by two guys, Burt Baskin and Irv Robbins. It eventually gets passed down in the family. Burt Baskin dies in 1967, and then his nephew takes over, but starts to move towards health. He was quoted as saying, "I was starting to believe that the more ice cream you ate, the more likely you were to have heart disease, diabetes, and obesity." So he walked away from the family business and devoted his attention to plant-based diets and animal rights. So that's sort of the interesting kind of anecdote, asterisk, if you will, to the Baskin Robbins story. Now, nevertheless, Jill, despite these trends, we should note that ice cream still remains a major sector in the U.S. Last year alone, the latest stats show that ice cream sales amounted to about $7 billion in the U.S. So take that, Department of Agriculture.
Especially with all of these heat stories. I mean, there really is no better dessert.
I mean, I guess you could go with popsicle. You still got some sugar in there, so just like go for the gold, folks. You know, some people will try to like the healthy ice creams or the non-sugar substitute ice creams. It's like, if you're gonna have the ice cream, just have the ice cream. Just have it in moderation, right? That's my general viewpoint on these things.
Not everyone can do that. I'm referring to myself. Moderation. What's that?
Moderation is an issue. I thought you also meant there's a lot of people who are lactose intolerant, so I understand the ice cream alternatives there as well. All right, staying with history here. Now time for On This Day in History. On this day in 1902, Jill, happy birthday to the air conditioner. American mechanical engineer Willis Carrier completed drawings for what would become the first modern air conditioner on this day in 1902. On this day in 1918, we head over to Russia when former Russian Tsar Nicholas II and his family were executed on this day by the Bolsheviks. Nicholas had lots of issues as the last Tsar, but one of the biggest ones came out of World War I, where Russia had the largest number of deaths, about nearly 2 million military deaths, 1.5 million civilian deaths. The food system collapsed in the country. People began to riot. And at first, Tsar Nicholas refused to abdicate. Finally, he stepped down. He was desperately calling his cousins, his second cousins, and the royal families across Europe, including in England. And they're like, nope, not letting you in. So in November of 1917, Bolshevik revolutionaries led by Vladimir Lenin take over the government. And then he was executed on this day a year later. All right, now to some more positive news. On this day in 1955, Disneyland was unveiled during a special live event on ABC. All right, fast forward now to the 90s. This week, 24 years ago, in 1999, John F. Kennedy Jr. died at the age of 38 when his single-engine plane went down off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. The latest tragedy to befall the Kennedy family. Though, Jill, oddly enough, there's a whole QAnon theory today that JFK Jr. is still alive, and they'll have various rallies where they believe he's spotted. Some of them link him to Trump. It's a bizarre theory that still exists, that JFK Jr., not unlike theories about Elvis and Tupac, is still around, still alive, and part of some larger secret government cabal. But let's move on from that and end here with pop culture. On this day, 30 years ago, Free Willy premiered in theaters. You might remember that film. There's a plan right now to do something similar for A Whale in Miami right now and release it off the West Coast. And finally, in movie history, as we mentioned at the top of the podcast, this week, 18 years ago, Jill, Wedding Crashers premiered in theaters, starring Owen Wilson, Vince Vaughn, a cameo from Will Ferrell, hence Mom, the meatloaf.
One of my husband and my favorite movies, and we quote it all the time.
It's one of those comedies from those mid-2000s, like 40-Year-Old Virgin, Wedding Crashers. There were a bunch of them that came out and was still the DVD era. And, I'd watch it repeatedly. And if you're in that certain millennial age range, you quote it all the time. Stage 5 clinger. There's a lot of quotes that came out of that,
yes.
that came out of that film. Some appropriate, some less appropriate for this podcast. But yeah, this week, July 2005, Wedding Crashers. Crab cakes and football. That's what Marilyn does, Jill.
It's funny because Bradley Cooper was in this movie kind of before he became like a heartthrob. He's
right.
just
I neglected
that
to mention him.
boyfriend.
Right. I mentioned Wilson. I mentioned Vaughn. I mentioned Farrell. Of course, you also had Isla Fisher. You mentioned Bradley Cooper. Christopher Walken. Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour is the kind of creepy mom. Rachel McAdams. It's a solid lineup.
And it makes you want to go to a wedding, right? All right, Moshe, we've got a wrap. Big thank you to everybody for listening to the Mo News podcast. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Review us in the App Store so we can continue to grow.
Yeah, those reviews matter. We hit 1,000 reviews on Apple. We're looking to hit that on Spotify. Talking to you, Spotify listeners. So thank you very much. If you listen to us on Spotify, you could take a moment to review us. Also, a reminder: we have the Mo News hotline for questions about the news. Give us a call: 1-800-711-MOSH, M-O-S-H. Again, that number is 1-800-711-MOSH. Call us on the line. Tell us your name, your news question. We'll answer it in a future pod.
All right, looking forward to hearing from everybody. Have a great day.